Hello and welcome to my podcast. Do me a favor, subscribe to the John Keim Report wherever you get your podcast. You're watching on YouTube, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. You can find us there as part of Empire Media. That's AMPIRE. Always much appreciated when you tune in. And don't forget, you can read my work on ESPN.com. Up now, I have a story on Jayden Daniels, the first impression by Jayden Daniels. Please note, there's a long way to go in this, folks. So yes, it was a very positive first impression, but there's still a long ways to go. Anyways, also up now is a story on the Commanders reaching a $1.3 million settlement with the Virginia Attorney General's office regarding the unrefunded or the way the unrefunded security deposits were handled under previous owner Dan Snyder. That the Commanders will pay $600,000 to people who are owed security deposits. And if they can't find them, they can't track them down, you put them into a certain fund. They also owe the state $600K and then another $100K for costs. So anyways, that's up on ESPN.com right now. A throwback to the Dan Snyder era. Hopefully it's one of the last ones we have to deal with. Anyways, today I'm joined by Matt Barrows from The Athletic, covers the 49ers, going to fill us in on Brandon Aiyuk. Is he really a possibility? Hey, he talked to Jayden Daniels. They're best friends. And he's upset with the 49ers. What's going to happen? We talked to Matt about that. Like, listen, weird things happen in the league. We'll let Matt fill you in on what's going on here because he gives good insight and he knows the situation very well. And he knows all the parties very well. And he's seen this happen with the 49ers a few times over the last few years. So Matt fills us in on that. Would they actually trade him? Would they entertain a trade? What would it take to get them to that point? Anyways, Matt will fill us in and then also ask him about Adam Peters because he covered Adam Peters. So stay tuned to that for a minute. And just before we get there, a couple little programming notes. I will be taking vacation soon, but I'm going to have a bunch of podcasts ready to go every week, a couple each week. I already recorded a couple, one of which is with Ryan Porter, who was a coach who has worked with Jayden Daniels since he was 10 years old, knows him as well as anybody as far as from a coaching perspective. So especially as a quarterback's coach, I know he works with others now too, but he continues to communicate with Porter, and he's one of a couple people that he texts or calls before every game. So there's a good relationship there. He knows Daniels very, very well. So I'm going to play that one on Monday. We'll have other interviews for you throughout, and just some quick practice shorts as well on the Empire Media YouTube page. So check those all out. But I'm going to be taking care of you guys over the next couple of weeks. Not as many podcasts, but I will be taking care of you because there's still stuff to talk about. Go around the NFC East, for example, and talk to reporters there. What's up with the Cowboys? How do things look, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Anyways, enough with that. You want to know about Brandon Aiyuk? So here's my conversation with the Athletics' Matt Barrows. And you can follow him on Twitter at Matt Barrows, Barrows. Well, Matt, first of all, thanks for coming on. Secondly, a topic that you're well aware of, there's a Brandon Aiyuk and, talking to Jayden Daniels and all that. First of all, what did you make of that little snippet that I guess was on TikTok? I think it was, right? Was it TikTok?
It was on TikTok.
Okay.
I don't really follow TikTok, but
Me
luckily
neither.
for us old guys that
Yeah.
it gets recycled enough that we eventually will see
Right,
these
right.
things. And I frankly didn't think much of it because he's been doing stuff like that since the off season began. The off season for him began with a very tearful sort of locker room cleanout day where he was in tears and said he wasn't sure if he was going to come back, which I thought was a little odd at that point because I thought it was clear that the 49ers wanted him back because he has such a strong rapport with Brock Purdy, who they clearly want back. So if you want Purdy to be good and effective, over the next few years, you want his favorite receiver there too. So, I mean, I sort of sloughed that off as, okay, here we go. We're getting into negotiation season. And we just seen this with Debo Samuel in 2022. Very, very dramatic, unfollows the team from Twitter, wants to be traded, all sorts of, social media snippets, just expressing his displeasure. So to me, it's an extension of that. Um, in March, I was on with Pittsburgh area reporters because Ayuk sent out a tweet to Mike Tomlin saying, "Hey, Mike, people say we look like twins. Do you think that's true?" And so that was kind of twisted into the 49ers are trading the Brandon Aiyuk to the Steelers. It's clear that he's being traded to the Steelers. So I sort of liken that to all of this Commanders stuff. The difference being that the Commanders are now, headed up by someone who drafted Brandon Aiyuk in Adam Peters. So that connection makes it a little bit more juicy, I would say, than perhaps the Pittsburgh one in March and some other ones that have come up since then.
So, but how would you read like the 49ers? I mean, he's got another year left on his contract. So he's, they don't have to trade him. So how do you read it from their perspective, their desire to bring him back?
Oh,
I think to have him long term.
Yeah, no, I think they want that for sure. Like I said, not only does he have the chemistry with Purdy, but he's really a very Kyle Shanahan-esque wide receiver, whereas Deebo Samuel isn't as much. I mean, Shanahan is really hard on his receivers. Shanahan played receiver at Duke and then at Texas. Shanahan fancies himself a receiver, and he puts more demands on that position than any other except for quarterback. And so he wants somebody who runs very precise routes, who does it exactly the way that he and then the quarterback, who's an extension of Shanahan, wants it. And Ayuk does that. And it took a while to get him there. There was a season where Ayuk wasn't starting. He was in the proverbial doghouse. This is what a receiver has to go through under Kyle Shanahan, and he's gone through that. So I know that Kyle Shanahan doesn't want to do that process again. He's done that with this guy. He's gotten the receiver exactly where he wants him, and that's why I think that they very much want him long term. It's long term at the right price, and everybody thinks that it's Shanahan and Lynch that are in charge of this right now. They're not. I mean, they tell Prog Morante, who's the chief negotiator, what they want, how badly they want a guy back. But it's Prog Morante and Jed York who are in control of the purse strings and who are doing all the negotiating. So, which is good because when the guy finally signs, you don't want, bitterness between him and the head coach or him and the GM, and they don't have that. So that's the idea is you keep the head coach out of it so that he can be good cop and the other guys can be bad cop.
So what do you think the odds of them working out a long-term deal then? Because you brought up Deebo, Nick Bosa, like if I remember right, like there were ebbs and flows with each of those situations as well. And then voila, training camp comes. Oh, it's all done now. It's all good.
Yeah, I would throw George Kittle into
Kittle, right.
that mix too. And also Fred Warner. These are all deals that got done either just before training camp or a few days into training camp. And in Nick Bosa's case, a few days before week 1 last year. I mean, he didn't practice before week 1. He was in the state of Florida right until, September, 8th or 9th or whatever it was. So, I mean, this is the 49ers MO. And, the Deebo Samuel situation showed that it's tough on the player. I mean, the player thinks that the team, like Ayuk is saying, that the team doesn't want you. George Kittle has said the same thing, that it's a difficult process. But I mean, at the end of the day, all these guys got big time, big money deals. So I can only assume that that's going to happen with Ayuk as well. What makes it interesting is Adam Peters, A, and then B, that there are a lot of wide receivers on this team. They drafted one in the first round, Ricky Pearsall, number 31 overall. And the idea at the time, or the understanding among, the media and the public was that, Pearsall is going to replace Deebo Samuel next year. He has an out in his contract that allows the 49ers to get out of that deal that he signed a few years ago. But I mean, if things got really contentious with Aiyuk, you could conclude that Aiyuk would be the odd man out of that mix.
Considering where the 49ers are at with their program, like they're a team that's built to win a Super Bowl right now. What's the likelihood that they would actually legitimately entertain a trade with one of their better players?
I mean, I think it would have to get very contentious for that to happen. He's under contract. As you know, they are in a Super Bowl year. He's their best receiver. He has a good synthesis with Brock Purdy. I mean, you want him on the field. You want him out there. You want him working with Brock Purdy right now or once training camp starts. So, like I said, I mean, I think they'd have to be blown away, and I think it would have to get really contentious, which is why I think Ayuk is kind of, um, squeaky wheel getting the grease right now. I mean, he's trying to make this as difficult on the 49ers as possible. So that's how I read sort of the social media cryptic messages that he's been, like I
Couple
said,
of
it's
them.
been happening since early March.
So what would mean getting blown away? Like, what do you think that would look like for them? And a first step is it has to be highly contentious to me, right? Is that the contentious part comes first, and then the blown away would come second? Is that how you see it?
Yeah, I mean, for Deebo Samuel, it was they needed a first round pick in return for him. And Ayuk was if they had gotten a really good offer during the draft and it starts with a first round pick, they would have entertained it at least. And they didn't. They didn't get that offer. Um, I don't know if, now that the draft is over, whether a 2025 first rounder would do it. I think that would start the conversation at least. But nobody was willing to, give up a first rounder for either Samuel or Ayuk in April. So I don't know why that would change now that we're even further down the road. But maybe it could. Maybe an injury comes down or something happens. But yeah, it would take a little bit of draft capital to move the needle on that.
My understanding has always been just like in reading you and talking to Nick Wagner, whatever, that if anybody goes, and you kind of brought up that it would be eventually Debo more so than Ayuk. And which is, I guess you kind of just said that too, but is that
Yeah, and it goes back to what I was just describing about the type of receiver that
right?
Ayuk is, a very precise route runner. He's got speed. Deebo Samuel is more of a, catch a short pass and then, turn it upfield for 75 yards, which, obviously is valuable. I mean, he carried the 49ers in the 2021, I'm getting my years mixed up now, playoffs. He was overwhelmingly their best player, offense and defense that year. He's spectacular. But the question is, how long can he keep that up? Is he
Right.
slowing down? He's had a bit of a weight issue, and that affects his effectiveness. Whereas, like I said, Ayuk is more a dyed in the wool wide receiver. Deebo Samuel is more of a receiver slash running back, jack of all trades, which is a great compliment to the Ayuk. But if you're going to have one, you would rather have the Ayuk guy because, like I said earlier, it takes Shanahan a long time to develop that guy.
Where do you think they're comfortable at paying him, Ayuk?
I think they made an offer at 26 million a year, and I think Ayuk and his people rejected that, don't like that. And I'm not sure whether there's been any real negotiation since then. So just to get your listeners up to speed, 26 is a huge number. John and I would love 26 million, but
Athletics not paying you that much yet?
not quite yet, not quite yet. I'm in a negotiation as well,
Okay.
but Amon-Ra St. Brown, for example, is getting 30 million. and Justin Jefferson is getting 35 million. So I'm certain that Ayuk's people want um, a number that begins with a TH there.
Right.
And so, there are ways to do that. St. Brown is making 30 million on a 4-year deal. That fourth year of the deal really inflates it. And really the first 3 years are a $28 million deal.
Mm.
And I feel like that's where this is eventually going to end up. It'll, on the day that it comes out, it's going to be Brandon Ayuk, gets a X-year deal that's worth $30 million a year. But then when the fine details come out, you'll look and say, you know what, it's more like a 3-year deal worth 28. And I think I think St. Brown is a good comparison, a good comp. I don't think anybody thinks that Ayuk is Justin Jefferson. So to me, that's where it should come out, and probably where it will come out on August 3rd or whenever.
I got one more question on that. Then I want to ask you about Adam Peters really quick too. But so your expectation would be that they eventually get a deal done.
Yes, I think it'll eventually turn out like the Deebo Samuel deal, like the George Kittle deal, like the Nick Bosa deal. Um, Again, the Nick Bosa deal goes into September. And I really think that the 49ers didn't do themselves any favors with that whole negotiation, because John Lynch the whole time it was saying that, we're not going to find Nick Bosa. We're cool with Nick Bosa working out away from the facility. They were very acquiescent to Nick Bosa, and it sets a precedent. Like, if you're going to treat Nick Bosa that way, then why aren't you treating me this way?
Right.
So I just wonder whether their leniency with Nick Bosa is kind of creating problems with everyone else who comes after Nick Bosa.
So from afar, and I know, you grew up following this franchise here from afar, and Adam Peters. How much have you paid attention to what they've done the offseason, and any thoughts on his approach and what you've seen them do here compared to what the Niners did when they started out there with this group?
Yeah, I mean, I thought he hit it out of the park. I haven't really paid that much attention to the Commanders draft, but the names that I was seeing being picked were names that I had researched. I'd done a big story on Luke McCaffrey, for
Mm.
example. And I will tell you that I talked to Adam Peters for that story, and I talked to him at the combine, and he made it sound like, oh, Luke McCaffrey, oh yeah, right, he's at Rice, and he ends up drafting him. So I think that he was playing possum a little bit with that one. But yeah, I mean, I can't name you the Commanders draft class, but I remember being impressed by it. And I think that Adam Peters' real um, strength when he was with the 49ers, because he was running the draft. I mean, remember, this is a team that hired John Lynch out of the broadcast booth.
Right.
So Lynch really needed somebody that knew the nuts and bolts of everything, especially the draft. And it was Peters who was running the draft. He was doing a lot of the operational stuff. And I thought Peters did a great job over the years of really creating synthesis between the scouting staff and the coaching staff. And I imagine that he's doing the same thing there in Washington. And I think that's a really, really important thing. Everybody getting along, but getting buy-in from the coaches about the people that are being drafted is so important to development. And the 49ers have done a good job drafting. They've done a better job in the later rounds than they have in the early rounds. But um, uh, the fact that those late round picks hit pretty consistently, I think underscores the relationship between coaching and front office. And that really goes toward Peters and to John Lynch quite a bit.
And then last thing too, so again, he came in there with the Shanahan Lynch group
You're
in
right.
17. So what was their approach to getting that program turned around? And I don't know, like, again, from afar, I don't know if you see any similarities, but what was that approach? And I know he wasn't the top decision maker, but he does have a role in that.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, the very broad approach was D-line and quarterback. Those were the two positions that the 49ers were going to concentrate on. And a lot of that stems from Lynch and Shanahan being on the same page. And, back then the 49ers thought that they were going to get Kirk
Right.
Cousins as the quarterback in 18. And then they traded for Jimmy Garoppolo. Garoppolo goes 5-0, and then he becomes the quarterback of the future. And I think that if you ask Shanahan today, he would say, I would rather have had Kirk Cousins back then. So finding the quarterback and then building the defensive line. And I feel like the Commanders, are already kind of halfway there with the defensive line. I think the
Yeah.
Commanders are more talented now than the 49ers were in 17. They blew that team apart. I mean, coming off the Chip Kelly coach season, there were some problems on that team. And so, it's a little ironic. Their first two picks were Solomon Thomas, did not work out, and Reuben Foster, as you know, did not work out. And somehow they survived that, and they survived that because some of the other players that they took later in the draft, George Kittle, 5th round, for
Right.
example, have turned out to be really good. But their philosophy was D-line and QB, and we'll make everything else work after that.
Awesome, Matt. Appreciate your time, and tell people where they can find you so they can get more Brandon Aiyuk updates, because until something's official, we know how it's going to go. So where can
Right.
they reach?
Yeah, I'm at Matt Barrows. That's me on Twitter, and I write for The Athletic, so you can find me there too.
There you go. Thank you, Matt.
All right, anytime, John. Talk to you soon.
Thanks to Matt for joining me, and thank you, as always, for tuning in. I'll be back with another episode on Monday when I talk to Ryan Porter, who has been Jayden Daniels' longtime quarterbacks coach. I'll talk to you next time.